can't see on my screen whether, yeah, I can now. Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to the January meeting of the Scrutiny Board. Before we get onto the agenda proper, I'm going to go around the table and ask board members to introduce themselves. I won't ask the executive board members and officers at this stage to introduce themselves. We'll leave that until the item for which they're attending. So in alphabetical order, Neil Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
Lou.
Morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Lou Cunningham, one of the Armley Ward councillors.
Thank you. Neil Dawson.
Councillor Neil Dawson from Morley South Ward.
I'm not sure. Oh, Jacob, welcome. Jacob. Jacob, would you like to introduce yourself? Jacob seems to be having some problems muting himself, so I'll move on. Camilla.
Good morning, Councillor Camilla Maxood from the Gipton and Hare Hills Ward.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Councillor Jonathan Taylor, Horsworth and Roden Ward.
Paul.
Councillor Paul Wadsworth, Guysian Roden.
And Jacob, I think you're with us now. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's Councillor Jacob Goddard, Roundhay Ward.
Thank you. And I'm Councillor Paul Truswell, and I chair this scrutiny board. Okay, moving on to the agenda, just running through the housekeeping items. Agenda item 1, appeals. There are no appeals. Agenda item 2, exclusion of the public. There are no items to which this applies. Agenda item 3, there are no late items. Agenda item 4, I'm not aware of any declarations of interest, but if you have any, please shout up. Agenda item 5, apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Hussain, who was appointed to this board by full council last week, but unfortunately isn't able to attend. So we are expecting Councillor Reagan as a substitute. I don't think she's on the call yet. We've also had an apology from Councillor Blake, and I think we had a sort of provisional policy from Councillor Mulherrin, and I can't see her on the call.
Councillor Mulherrin was having some childcare issues and may well join the call later in the meeting. Councillor Truswell.
Okay, that's fine. So that takes us on to page 5 of the agenda, the minutes of the last meeting, agenda item 6. And I'll go through these page by page. If you've got any matters arising or any corrections, please shout out. I understand that on page 5, minute 50, that information was eventually provided to Councillor Dawson. Can I just confirm that that happened? Councillor Dawson?
Yes, that's true. I did get a response from Gary Bartlett, so thank you for that. Excellent response. Albeit the response is further delays in improvements at Morley Station, but you know, it's not ideal, but I got the response, which was what I was asking for. I also got a response on Farnley Wood Beck from the officers who attended from the environment, so that was very good as well. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much for confirming that, Neil. So if there's nothing further on page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8. So if there are no corrections and no matters arising, are members content for me to sign these when I physically can and as a true record? Yeah, I'll take Sam's as agreement. So moving on to agenda item 7, the financial monitoring report up to month 7. At this point, could I ask now, do we have James with us yet? Could I ask the officers to introduce themselves and then we'll go on to the item. I don't think we actually have James Lewis with us yet. Okay, so Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm Martin Farrington. I'm the Director of City Development. I think Phil Evans is going to take the lead on taking us through the paper.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Jill?
Hi, good morning. I'm Jill Stewart. I'm the Principal Finance Manager for City Development.
Oh, thank you. And finally, Phil. You can introduce yourself and then go straight into introducing the paper. Phil, please.
Okay. So I'm Phil Evans. I'm the Chief Officer Operations within City Development. The paper in front of members is one in a series of regular updates that are presented to Executive Board and then also to Scrutiny Board, and it sets out the Council's overall budget position at period 7, which is for the month of October. Specifically for City Development, the position is outlined on page 20, page 8 of the appendix, but page 20 of the agenda pack. And as at period 7, it very much was a continuation of the picture that we presented previously, with an overall overspending in the Directorate of approaching £20 million. That had shown a slight improvement from the month 6 position. And broadly, the areas where we'd suffered particularly were inactive Leeds, where there's a significant under recovery of income as a result of the COVID lockdowns. Active Leeds is the responsibility for different Scrutiny Board, but for completeness, we highlight it here. And then there are some other areas of potential areas where we've most notably had income reductions, so in arts and heritage, in terms of our ability to put on events and the income that derives from there. From asset management and regeneration, which is in relation to rental and commercial income that the department receives. Some reductions in planning and sustainable development as a reduction from planning and building fee income that had shown an improving position. Some change in relation to markets and the city centre, with particular issues in relation to advertising income, given the fact that the advertising sort of companies were having a very frustrated and set of downturn in terms of their income, and then some under recovery in highways, particularly in the DLO. So broadly, Chair, that's what we've gone through previously, and the period 7 is just a continuation of that. For completeness, I would probably just say that for the current period, so the period 7 there is only until October, so it doesn't pick up any issues arising from lockdown 3, the period of additional lockdowns in November, and doesn't pick up any issues from the current lockdown that started a few weeks ago. Happy to take questions, Chair, on any matters arising that might help some of my colleagues and myself will be able to answer.
Thank you for that, Phil. Neil Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose my question is just picking up on what Phil said in terms of this is a report done in October. When will we become aware of the projected further savings or losses on income arising from the lockdown in November and indeed the current lockdown we're going through now? Will we have to wait until the end of March before knowing the outcome of the current lockdown?
So Chair, if I respond to that, there is a delay in terms of reporting to Executive Board and then on to Scrutiny, but obviously there's an officer process that picks that up with much more frequency, and we undertake that reporting review on a monthly basis. The next deadline for that is next week. I think it's fair to say that there will be an increasing position of under recovery of income as a result of the lockdown in November and January. From memory, I think we probably got to a position that just shy of £21 million. So not that significant an increase, given the fact that there's been quite a lot of further reductions. And that reflects the fact that when we did our modelling to start with, we did some prudent assessments of where income would be impacted. So we have sort of effectively made sure that there were provisions for some of these losses. The other thing to probably highlight is the fact that whilst the directorate shows that £20 million loss of income at this stage, we have to report that because that's the impact upon the directorate's position. The government, as part of its response to COVID, provided an income compensation scheme that said where income was lost as a result of certain activities, subject to a 5% de minimis, they would repay us 75p in the pound for every lost income. So the overall position in relation to the active Leeds element, which is the biggest chunk of under recovery, will be smoothed out somewhat, but that will be shown corporately as opposed to at the directorate level.
So just to recap on that, Phil, how confident are you and officers that the financial situation come the end of the financial year will just about balance?
It will balance in terms of actually saying that we will contain there or thereabouts our projected position. So it won't be a balanced position in terms of coming out as our original budget said, but we expect that £20 million that we've sort of projected for quite some time now that will be there or thereabouts. The council's overall position, I don't know whether Councillor Lewis is on the call at the moment, is that obviously the city development sort of numbers feed into the council's overall position, and my understanding is still that the budget position will be balanced at the next executive board paper as a result of the income that's come to the authority from the government, and then we know that next year there was a small gap of about £4.8 million. And executive board were considering or are due to consider how that gets dealt with from an overall council perspective.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Councillor Lewis isn't actually on the call at the moment, but Councillor Harland has very helpfully informed us that he's on a call at the moment and will be joining us shortly. Neil Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. And just looking at all these figures, those of us who are not accountants or financial experts, it is a blizzard of figures. It's quite difficult to follow. But just looking at the ELI section in the report, obviously nobody can discuss individual arrangements, but would it be possible to tell us what the average costs have been of the severance packages? So in other words, what the average severance package would have been, please?
I could definitely check with colleagues as to whether that information is available. So if I check with colleagues in corporate human resources and corporate finance, and then what I'd suggest, Chair, is if we get a note back to Becky on that, either explaining whether if it is available and if we can share it, detailing that, or if not, explaining why it may not be available. But I definitely will undertake to go back and ask colleagues a question on that.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I think that would be fine. Neil, do you want to come back?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair, just to say that obviously the numbers of people taking advantage of this scheme this year has been quite high. Is that expected to carry on into subsequent years, or is this regarded as a peak, as a one-off peak?
How long is a piece of string, Phil?
Well, I was going to say, I don't know whether Martin would like to answer that.
Yeah, on my screen, that's a nice pass across the field to Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer that, Councillor Trustwell. I mean, the earlier leavers initiatives in various forms has been in the council's toolbox for a number of years when there have been significant budget challenges. So there was a significant use of it in sort of around 2011-12. It did then continue into 13-14 and sort of into 15. So I think you'll probably see a similar pattern where there is a peak at this point. There may be then some future elements at a smaller degree, albeit that will have to be an amended scheme because of the restrictions that are now in place in terms of the caps, and the so that those schemes are less attractive and therefore not as available for us to use to manage reductions in the same way in terms of the amount of people the council employs. So I think there will be a feature, but it'll be definitely less than it has at that peak that we've just gone through.
It's like so many of these measures, the fruit gets higher and higher up the tree. Okay, I haven't got anyone else indicating that they wish to speak or ask a question on this item. So with your leave, can we move on to agenda item 8, the initial budget proposals? And I think, Phil, you're in the box seat again on it, according to my little chair's brief. You need to unmute, Phil.
I can't multitask, I'm sorry. If I just get that document, if I just get to that paper, so if you members can bear with me.
Sure, it's page 51 if you've got the agenda papers.
Lovely, thank you. So where we are on this one, Chair, is the Scrutiny Board have received some briefings previously about savings that were going to be taken forward from the Directorate, reflecting the need for the Council to make an overall position that balances 21-22. And this paper brings these back to the Scrutiny Board in composite form. There are no additional proposals included in the paper other than the proposals that have been presented and discussed to the board previously. You'll recall that there's been a number of tranches of those, and we haven't taken any forward since the time that we last delivered an update to the board. Obviously, the proposals in there, and again, this is a hefty paper, but there are a number of proposals that have been taken forward that split down into business as usual proposals or service review proposals. For the business as usual proposals, effectively they will all be delivered in the next financial year, and we've undertaken budget reconciliation so that that process is undertaken. For the service review proposals, the overwhelming majority of those that were within our area within city development were subject to consultation periods. The consultation periods ran until early January, and officers are currently sort of doing analysis and evaluation reports on those. And that hopefully should mean that when we get to Executive Board in February, we're able to update Executive Board on what that public consultation has told us and what that means in terms of each of those proposals, and whether there are indeed any alternative proposals that might have flown from the public consultation process. In addition to that, we are obviously having conversations with our trade union colleagues around those savings proposals now that we've completed the element of public consultation, and we'll be discussing with trade union colleagues what that might mean as we move into the future. Probably that's all I'd wanted to say at this stage, Chair, because we're in that position whereby the consultation period is closed, but we haven't yet completed the evaluation and drawn up the recommendations as to where we get to with individual savings proposals. The Directorate is very clear, however, that as part of the need to balance the 21-22 budget, that if there are any proposals that don't move forward, that those alternative savings will need to be provided, either in terms of short-term measures to give us additional time, or alternative proposals if those proposals aren't going to get taken forward. And I'll probably pause there.
Thanks very much, Phil. I mean, you've answered the question that I was going to put to you about the timescale for the consultations and the review, but basically, just to reiterate what you were saying, was that you're hoping they will be completed in January with a view to reporting to February. Have I got that right? Fine, thank you.
Yeah.
Neil Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. I believe when I read the report yesterday that there's a section that talks about the centralisation of property management. And I was going to ask, does this bring about any savings? Because I think in the latest tranche of proposals, there are no savings, specific savings identified in city development, not in the report. So does it bring about savings in the overall budget?
My understanding, Chair, is that that paper is being worked up in terms of how that centralisation occurs. There are two elements to it. So there's an element of it which impacts upon city development in terms of asset management, but there's also an impact in resources and housing in terms of how facilities management, both soft and hard FM, is delivered. My understanding is that there will be savings proposals that arise from that, and again, they're being worked up for presentation to Executive Board for Executive Board to consider. I don't have the detail on those as yet, but my understanding is that the expectation is that all of the organisational changes will deliver efficiency savings of one value or another.
Is that okay, Neil, or do you want to come back?
I suppose the only other question I was going to ask was, is it likely to lead to more pressure on ELI? Will there be more requests for members of staff to have ELI, as part of those savings?
Chair, if I pick that one up again, I think the general principle would be that where we have to make efficiency savings, there'll be a range of areas that are looked at. There'll be procurement efficiencies, there'll be spending efficiencies. There may well be some areas where there has a staffing impact. If there is a staffing impact from that, obviously the council's position that we should try to manage that in the first instance by voluntary means. But as I say, until that detailed work is done on that savings profile and presented to Executive Board, we don't really have the detail.
Okay, is that okay, Neil?
That's fine, yes, thank you.
Okay, moving on, Katie.
Yeah, hi. We're kind of in a bit of an interim period, really, aren't we, where we're waiting for these evaluations. So I guess one question is really on the process. What happens when the results of that come through? And then my next question probably goes to Paul, actually. Do we then as a board get an additional chance to comment?
Yeah, I'm not going to offload this question on to Becky, although I'm sure she'll want to comment, but the answer is yes, we can. I don't know whether it would require a separate working group or a separate board meeting, Becky?
It would, yeah, due to the timescales involved. If the board did want to look at anything in more detail, we'd have to set up a separate meeting in order to do that.
Okay. I mean, I'd be perfectly prepared as chair to set up a provisional meeting. If we don't need it or members don't feel we need it, then at least we can just cancel it. Whereas I think if we suddenly decide we want a meeting, tearing around like the proverbial blue arse flies would make it, I think, difficult to fit one in. So would it be an idea for us to set up perhaps a working group meeting provisionally that fits in with the timing? Because I suspect the window of opportunity to comment on these things, as before, will be very, very tight. So would that seem to be a sensible way forward, having something in our back pocket?
Yeah, I'd like that, because I kind of feel in a kind of a position really where I don't have much to ask at the moment, but I will have when the evaluations come through.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, yeah, it is a bit of a phony war period at the moment. And I think, yeah. So unless there are any objections from other members of the board, we'll start consulting on possible dates for a working group to have that discussion if we feel it's necessary. Okay. Right. I haven't got any other indications that anyone wants to ask questions or make a contribution on this item. So thank you to the officers, many of whom I think will be staying with us for the next item anyway. So moving on to agenda item 9, which is on page 183, the Best Council Plan performance reports. And we have a number of additional officers who have joined us. So I will just go through and ask you to introduce yourself to the board and to any members of the public who are watching. And unhelpfully, my tiles have all suddenly jumped. So in no particular order, Eve.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Eva Utaus. I'm Chief Officer for Culture and Economy.
Okay, you're all moving about. Tim.
Good morning. My name is Tim Rollett. I work for the Council's Intelligence and Policy Service, and my team has the responsibility for compiling the performance indicators and then checking them with the relevant staff in the services.
Martin.
Hi, Martin Long. I'm Head of Employment and Skills, so I can answer any questions around anything to do with those KPIs.
Gary.
Good morning, Gary Bartlett, Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation. I have asked Lindsay McGarvey to join me as well to help answer any questions on road safety and safer roads issues. So she'll be joining at some point.
Right, okay. Chris?
Morning, Chair. My name's Chris Shillito. I work with Tim in the Intelligence and Policy Service, responsible for compiling the report.
Now, I have got Fiona Bolam down on my list of possible attendees, but I don't see Fiona on screen.
No, Chair, I stood Fiona down as the relevant KPIs are actually on the agenda for next month's meeting.
All right, okay, thank you, Eve. And then Lindsay, who has now joined us.
Good morning, everyone.
Short and sweet. Okay, so I think, Martin, you're going to introduce this part of the agenda. What I suggest we do is that we let Martin introduce the KPIs and then we go through them one by one rather than scattergunning across all of them. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if I just provide the headlines that are outlined in the report. So the first section looks at numbers of people supported to improve skills. By the end of Q2, there was 3,902 people who've been supported in terms of improving skills. That represents 61% of the annual target at the halfway point, so that's on track. In terms of 20% of those that participated from the most deprived lower super output areas, and 51% were from BAME backgrounds. In terms of the adult learning programme specifically, that has been impacted by the COVID-19, where we've moved from face-to-face learning to online. So in the 1920, there was 3,746 learners through the programme. That's a decrease of 26% compared to the previous year when there was 5,052. And for this year, key areas of learning included English as a second language, English, maths and employability. In terms of supporting people into work, Q1 was 1,788, that's 42% of the annual target at the halfway point. Key issues there in the context of COVID is lower vacancies in the workplace, which makes that work strand more difficult, and then also supporting people remotely rather than face-to-face. The report covers people identified as NEET. That figure for Leeds is 7.2% versus 9.9% in the previous year. Within the report that you have, it outlines how that looks in the context of core cities, where Leeds at 7.2% is mid-table against other core cities. In terms of road traffic, killed and seriously injured, again, a significant COVID impact here. In this case, it's reduced the number of incidents of killed or serious injuries on the highway. It's 34.2% down on the previous year. So the actual numbers is 173 for this reporting period. And the graph that you have in your paper shows that that's a consistent reduction throughout this period when COVID has impacted on those numbers. And also the table in the paper shows that those reductions are against all user classes on the highway. In terms of initiatives through the neighbourhood policing team, that shows that there was 1,471 drivers that neighbourhood policing interacted with through various measures outlined in the report, and also what's called the Spark project, where a further 575 drivers were involved as initiatives to try and influence and reduce driving behaviour that could cause KSIs. And then on young people, the number of KSIs also reduced from 25 in 2019 to 17 in 2020. On bus passenger numbers, the figures in here are for 2018 and 2019. So for 2019, it was 67.4 million. That's a 1.35% increase on 2018, albeit these figures will dramatically reduce in 2020 as a consequence of COVID, as I'm sure members will appreciate. And then finally, the report covers flood risk and the number of commercial and residential properties that have been moved out of flood risk areas between the period 2017 to 2020. So over that period, there are 3,208 residential properties and 501 commercial properties. The main area of activity that has finalised and taken properties out of flood risk in the last year has been the completion of the Whitebeck project, making use of contributions from the development of a series of brownfield land that the council brought forward, and then also working with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust in terms of improving the natural environment as part of that flood scheme. Other flood schemes moving forward, Flood Alleviation Scheme 2 has been on site for the past 12 months, and we are in the process of receiving confirmation from Treasury on the £21 million of additional funding to allow us to do the second step of that project. And then also we expect in the next few weeks to be officially starting on site at Otley in terms of the flood scheme there. But that's a headline of the issues in the report, Chair, and we're happy to receive questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Martin. So as I indicated at the start of the agenda item, I'm going to run through the KPIs one by one, starting on page 185. 3.3, the percentage of working age Leeds residents with at least a level 4 qualification. Do we have any questions on that? No. Before I move on to the next one, I welcome councillors Lewis and Mulheron, who have now joined us, although you're on a different page in terms of my tiles, but I'll try and keep an eye on you. So that takes us to 3.4, number of people supported to improve their skills. Do we have any questions or contributions on that? Turning the page, 3.5, number of people supported into work. Any questions or comments? No. Gender, I mean, on that one, I did ask for further information at Chair's brief regarding the digital connection or digital engagement of people who would otherwise be receiving training face to face. I think got quite a comprehensive response back, which I think I shared with all of you. 3.6 on page 187, progress 8 scores. Any questions, comments? No. 3.7 on page 188. Neil, and then Katie. You're still muted, Neil.
Sorry, Chair. My question is around the NEETs, and particularly around the number of not knowns, because apart from Bristol, who are at the bottom of the list, we're the second highest in the number of not knowns. So are we continuing work to reduce the number of not knowns? Because this sounds more like an administrative issue rather than tackling the NEET problem in itself.
Thanks, Neil. Right, don't all shout at once. Who's this sounds like one for you, Eve.
Martin is probably the most familiar with how those numbers are constructed, and if he doesn't know, then we'll get you an answer back at a later date. So sorry for the past, but Martin, do you know the background to that?
So I think that the not known figures is mainly where there's lots of factors where people move between areas, and so they've left school but they've not registered as universal credit and things like that, so they're not in the system anywhere. So we know they're not officially neat because they're not registered anywhere as unemployed, but they've left school and we don't. So it's a difficult administration task to try and track them down, and there's quite a lot of work in children's services to try and unpick that. And quite a lot of it might be where they've been to Leeds schools, but they actually live across the border in Bradford, so they might have registered somewhere else. So it's quite a complicated. I think when the figures do come out, I think the not knowns should improve significantly because of the number of young people that have stayed on in education because of the uncertainty in the labour market at the moment, and we know there's been a big increase in the September intake. So I expect the not known figures will come down when those figures are released. But there's quite a lot of data at the moment that's been delayed, that's not coming out for different reasons, and that's one of them.
Okay, thanks very much, Martin. I think that was touched on in the note that went out after Chair's brief. Neil, do you want to come back on anything?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Katie.
Yes, mine was kind of the same question, really. It was about the not knowns. But last time we discussed this, we did have quite a long discussion about the not knowns and about the fact that as a city, we used to have a fairly robust system for tracking school leavers, and that disappeared, 5-6 years ago. And we kind of came to the conclusion that that was partly responsible for our increase in not knowns because schools weren't being chased to provide that data. And I've highlighted a little bit on my pack. It's 3.7.2 where it says for 2021-22 a new case management system is being implemented to support monitoring. And there's a strong partnership commitment reinforced by the need to mitigate the disruption to learning caused by COVID-19. But specifically around the case management system, we did discuss this last time we looked at these KPIs. And I said I really welcome that because I thought it was lacking, and it was something that as a city we used to do really well. So I just wondered if there's an update on this case management system, which I think was going to involve more people being employed to do the tracking, which is essentially what's needed to bring down the not knowns.
Martin?
So, I mean, that sits within children's services, so I can't give a kind of comprehensive update. I know that they are working quite hard on that system, and back in, I think it was March, April, they did increase the team to make sure that was in place. But I'd have to, I can go and speak to colleagues in children's services and get an update for you if that's helpful.
Okay, Katie.
Yeah, I would really appreciate that because it's something that's very close to my heart in my day job, and it is something that, as I say, as a city, we used to be super at. You know, I'm a high school teacher, and we have to provide that data 3 times a year. Our intended destinations and then our actual destinations. And what used to happen was that there was a team of people on the phone and door knocking to track down all of these not knowns, and the city figure was pretty good. So it seems to me that if that team is back on the case, we can bring it down, and it would be great to have it a lot higher than it is.
Yeah,
okay, Martin, if you could raise that issue with colleagues in children's services and maybe send us a note back responding to the issues that Councillor Dye's raised.
Yeah, I will do.
Okay, I don't see any more questions on this one. So moving on to page 189, 3.8, number of people killed or seriously injured in road traffic collisions. I don't know whether Lindsay wants to elaborate on this for us. Clearly, it's one of those KPIs that has been distorted and diminished by COVID. So it's difficult for us to make too much out of them this year. But
Yeah,
Lindsay or
thanks,
Gary?
Chair.
Well, Chair, if I say something and then perhaps I ask Lindsay particularly to make some comments around Vision Zero, which I know you touched on at the last meeting. So Martin has earlier indicated that there's been significant reductions, and the latest information that we have is that that's continued throughout the rest of the period. So we're looking at all casualties for the year of 2020 being approximately down 35%, from 1,907 to 1,235 road casualties. In terms of killed and seriously injured, down 36% from 356 to 228 in 2020. But as you know, we're doing some work around the transport strategy, and one of the key elements of that transport strategy is adopting Vision Zero. And Lindsay is doing some great work around this area, and I just wondered if she wanted to say a few words on that.
Yeah, of course, Gary, I will. And just to note, some of the feedback that we've had from the police in recent months is that although there is a decline in KSIs, what they are finding is that there's been quite an increase in speeds and quite a significant jump from maybe 10, 20 miles an hour over the limit to quite considerable amounts, and that's partly due to the decrease in volume, so people have got that opportunity more. So we are seeing some quite different behaviour during the COVID period, even though there is that drop. So that's slightly alarming. In terms of Vision Zero, it's something that we're working on at the moment, and I'd be happy to provide some feedback on that progress at the next meeting. So we're working through. It's almost a different approach to road safety. It's an approach that was almost invented in Sweden in the late 90s, and it's just starting to trickle through to policy now. But it's looking at road safety from a different perspective. So it's not the traditional sort of engineering and education method. It's looking at a much more holistic approach. So it's about going out to communities, it's about corporate responsibility, it's looking at vehicle safety. So it's all about reducing the severity, and the target is that we have no killed or seriously injured by 2040, and that's the key date that's been adopted by most authorities in the UK. So it's a real step change in how we look at road safety. It's a huge challenge for us, and we need to start working with different organisations and different people to try and make a real impact on how we do that, and using our resources slightly differently as well.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. I think that the board would want to take up your offer to pursue this further in more detail at a future meeting. This is a KSI that always exercises as a board, and almost every year we have a separate session, usually including police colleagues and others, to unpick some of the figures. So certainly that's something that we can look at. We also promised ourselves that we would possibly make the whole issue of road safety the subject of a more detailed inquiry, and we've delayed that for obvious reasons of getting people, especially contributors, campaigners from the community. But I see no reason why we can't have another item sometime this municipal year, and perhaps starting to scope out what the inquiry, when it does take place in due course, might look like and who we might involve. I've got Lou, Jonathan, and then Neil. So Lou.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone. Mine's mostly a request for further information, please, just for a ward breakdown of the KSI data, because I think this is a really great opportunity for us to really dig down into the hotspots that most of us are already aware of in our wards, but just to see if the mapping of those KSI stats match up with what we already know. And welcome your work, Lindsay, and just to say we have a very active Armour Community Road Safety Group, and we'd be very willing to join in with that scoping work. Thank you.
Okay. And when you talk about the figures, Lou, presumably over time, maybe last 5 years?
I think we had a ward breakdown last year, Chair. So just an update of that to see how it's matching up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lindsay, do you
Yeah,
want
we can pick that up, and that's no problem. Happy to do that. And just for completeness, it's just a reminder that what we have is the collisions that are reported to the police via their systems. There will be a lot of information locally about minor bumps that will not be on the system, and depending on which part of the city you are, and this is a national issue, there might be 10, there might be hundreds of minor bumps, but they will not be on the system. We just deal with the ones that are reported to the police because they give us the objective data to make decisions around investment. So I just thought it worth just mentioning that.
Okay,
but happy to provide the data, so we'll get that issued via Becky.
Okay, Lou, are you okay with that?
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate those comments, Gary.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to sort of start at the end of this and work my way back. 3.8.14 is the only mention I think we've had since we spent quite a bit of time on the motorcycle trial. And I'm just wondering if we can have a more thorough update as to what has happened so far. More importantly, when we are expecting this trial to start, just to give some meat to what it is that we did actually spend quite a lot of time on. And on that, I read last week, and I'm just reading the article again. Milton Keynes, Derby, Nottingham, some others have dipped into a pot from the Department for Transport to allow electric cars into as a trial period into bus lanes. What's our officers' view on electric vehicles being allowed into bus lanes as a trial initially? And if I can go back to the Vision Zero, I do welcome another look at another perspective on how we can reduce KSIs. From what you said, Lindsay, very briefly, it does seem like a very touchy-feely sort of let's try and speak with people about their speeds, where I do feel enforcement is also needed. The camera partnership review, which was instigated from work from this board, I understand. I know that has concluded now, yet we haven't, as a board, had sight of that. I've had sight of the findings, which is let's just keep things as they are, which I think we were all, as members, really unsatisfied with. And for that review to have concluded without any input from elected members from anywhere across West Yorkshire, which is my understanding, I feel it's just completely unsatisfactory. Gary, you'll be aware I've since requested another review of the ring road in my ward, where there was that very serious accident where four young lads lost their lives. And I just can't believe that even following what we're all saying and the Vision Zero and all the rest of it, that it's just status quo. Let's just keep it as it is, because from what I got from the answer from your department was, well, people don't like speed cameras. Well, people don't like speed cameras because they speed through them and then they get fined and then they get points. So I think we really need to have a real look at this. It needs to come back to this board. We need to discuss it. I am quite exercised about this, Chair. So I'll wait now to see what the answers are.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think, as I said earlier, we're all exercised by these figures and the need to start taking action to depress them. But Lindsay, Gary, do you want to come back on those points that Councillor Taylor's raised?
Yeah, sure. And Lindsay, please come in if you want to add to it. So in terms of the motorcycles in bus lanes, so it's as per the note, we did with the Scrutiny Committee consider this last year, and we made a recommendation around the A65. At that time, we said that we would endeavour to get the trial in place in this financial year. We're still trying to work to that. Obviously, things have been complicated by COVID and pressure on resources and the active travel work that colleagues who are the same colleagues that would progress this bus lane trial would be involved in. But we're acutely aware that we made that commitment, and we are chasing it down and trying to deliver it as per the report. As I say, it will depend on other pressures that suddenly occur over the next few weeks and months, but we are trying to deliver it in accordance with a statement in the report.
Gary, just on that, just to interrupt from the chair, I did ask for a little more information on this particular section at chair's brief, and I noticed it wasn't expanded because I anticipated there would be questions from board members. But I think you can confirm that the Motorcycle Action Group were closely involved in identifying this as the pilot project.
Well, we certainly took on board their comments. They've made comments on a number of corridors coming in, and we took those on board. But on balance, our recommendation was to go with the scheme on the A65. And we're still in correspondence with the group. That obviously they continue to make representation around this topic. Yeah, it's just that the pressure on the individuals in the team that will be delivering this has been impacted by COVID and the emergency active travel funding late last year, and then that being changed to active travel funding schemes, and the need by the DfT to spend money very quickly, has deflected some resources. But we are acutely aware, as I've said, that we do need to honour that commitment that we made, and we are intending to do that.
Okay.
In terms of the electric cars in bus lanes, yes, that was considered. Oh, it's going back some time ago now. On balance, the recommendation and feedback from, I think it was Councillor Richard Lewis at the time, was that we wouldn't open up the bus lanes for electric vehicles. It's a very similar sort of discussion around motorcyclists, really. We're trying to give priority to the buses and public transport. In some circumstances, taxis are allowed in, and in some circumstances, cyclists are allowed in. And we're trying to limit the number, because once you start to increase the numbers of vehicles in the bus lanes, you then start to have an impact on the public transport services. So it is a fine line, and with the growth of electric vehicles, which hopefully for a number of reasons will be significant in quite a short space of time now, I think that that concern will be realised very quickly. So that was the stance when it was last considered. Yes, Vision Zero. I personally, I'd welcome the Scrutiny to have more input into the development of the strategy around Vision Zero. This is going to be a very important document for us all. It will involve enforcement, as Councillor Taylor referred to, but it can't stress enough, really, it's going to be a completely whole systems approach to road safety. It will be very different to the traditional way of doing road safety. If at a very simple level I can just explain it, in the past it seems road safety has relied on some of our officers going into schools, for example, to do road safety training, and then for officers to actually identify where the hotspots are and come up with engineering measures. This is completely different, where it's not just down to the council. This is down to every business, every individual to consider how they approach moving about the city and their choice of vehicles. It will involve changes to vehicle construction. Until we have the Scrutiny Committee and the development of this strategy further explained to you, it's quite difficult to explain the significant change in approach. But it is very exciting, but it will be very challenging to deliver, because it will require input from all and reaction by all to get anywhere near a Vision Zero outcome. Councillor Taylor's comment about cameras, absolutely. I'm conscious that there are several emails outstanding to Councillor Taylor, which we are chasing up. My understanding of the position is that at a local level, the criteria remains unchanged, because at a national level, there's been a call to review the criteria for safety cameras. And again, chasing that up very recently, because I suspected the question might be asked today. My understanding is that at a national level, this review is being undertaken with a view to it being completed later this year. Again, I'm happy to come back to Becky with perhaps a written statement to that effect, if that's helpful. But obviously, we and the police are trying to have an input into that review. We haven't had a response yet, but it's our request sort of builds on the feedback from these scrutiny meetings about wanting to be involved. So we'll continue to push that, and I know the police have particularly asked to be involved in that review. So Lindsay, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on Councillor Taylor's points as well, just to reiterate, it is a much more thorough approach. If we look at enforcement, for example, it's about finding different ways to enforce. So it's not just about the static cameras. It's about changing legislation to allow others to be able to enforce. At the moment, civil enforcement officers in London boroughs have very different powers to those outside of London. It's about changing how our civil enforcement officers can enforce as well. So it's a much more thorough way. It's about using technology. If you go over the speed limit, automatic braking systems, those kinds of things. So a lot of it isn't in the hands of council itself, but we can support it, or we can make sure that we have things like bus standards that come through the combined authority, and that those vehicles that we procure have certain standards that protect our drivers, but also protect people outside of the vehicle. So that it's bringing all that together. It's looking at it from every angle, not just the traditional angle that we've used before.
Thank you, Gary and Lindsay. Jonathan, you want to come back?
Yeah, just briefly. The point on the EV electric vehicles in bus lanes, I do take that point. If we start prioritising everybody, then the point is really diminished. But if there is trials that are going on, I would appreciate if we could keep an eye on the outcome of those. I know I will be, but just might feed into some work that we might be looking at some point in the future. I think it's really important that the response from the Camera Partnership Review comes to this. We members have sight of that. Gary, I think that needs to be done very, very urgently, because I know that the outcome is available. And just thank you, Chair, for preempting our questions on the motorcycle trial. If you do get any further information on that, I'd appreciate if we could also have sight of that.
Okay.
For anyone to come back on me on anything for that. Cheers.
Okay, I'm sure that Gary and Lindsay have taken on board those comments, and we will be getting that information. Neil Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I mean, I think the figures show a very distinct improvement. So I think it's a congratulations to everybody involved, whether it's the police, community safety, highways. I think it's a great example of partnership work in delivering results. Let's hope we can improve and hit our target before 2040. My question is similar to Councillor Cunningham's. It's a request for more information, particularly related to the Spark initiative, which looks to have been successful, but it would be nice to know where the hotspots were. And in particular, I mean, in my ward, one of the areas asked to be included was Scotchman Lane, which is the road from Morley to Batley. Maybe it's people speeding to get out of Batley and into Morley, I don't know, but I'd like to see if we can get any more information about the Spark campaign and where the successes were in terms of increased enforcement. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Gary?
Well, Lindsay, I wonder if you wanted to pick that one up, maybe closer to the detail on that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a further chat with you, Councillor Dawson, and try to come to or try and find some ways to address those issues, and certainly with the police in hand. So if you want to give me some more details in terms of if there's particular times, I know that's not always the case, but we can certainly put that through to the officers that are working in Spark, and they can address that on their patrols.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll email you, Lindsay. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Lindsay, it's fair to say that this is our joint initiative with the police, where we're helping to fund this work. It builds on work that they did in Bradford, but we had similar sort of issues in Leeds, and it is a trial, but it is trying to address some of the antisocial behaviour that we see, which sometimes leads to criminal activities, and so we're holding a lot of store on this initiative.
That's right, and I will say as well that it has been impacted somewhat with COVID as well. So the ability to have the number of officers that we wanted to have out has been a lot less, but we've still had some really fantastic results, as the figures show. So so certainly, if we were operating at full strength, I think it would be even more positive.
Okay, I don't. My screen is frozen.
Have we lost the chair, Becky?
I'm just looking, Councillor Taylor. He's still showing up, but we've no video. Do you want to just give him a minute or two to see if he can reconnect?
Yep.
I think I'm back. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. I can anyway. Well.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'd got Neil Buckley as the next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it was just a brief comment going back to the motorcycles in the bus lanes, actually. And I fully agree with what Councillor Taylor said about this. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a great emphasis at the moment on cycling. And obviously that's a very green activity, but motorcycling, it's not as green, but I think it can be promoted as a contribution towards fewer emissions and a reasonably green way of travelling, and also actually perfectly safe. And I just wanted to ask one question, that we've got this trial which is going to be coming up, but is there any possibility that a motorcyclist might just assume that because he can do that on the A65, that the rest of Leeds isn't the same, and therefore he could be inadvertently fined for doing something he shouldn't do 2 miles away or something like that? And is the reason why we haven't had a pan-Leeds trial simply a practical one, that it's difficult to put the infrastructure in place?
Okay, thanks for that, Neil. Before Gary and or Lindsay come back, could I just say that my broadband seems to be fluctuating. So if I disappear again, would the board agree that Councillor Dawson, as we've previously indicated, should take the chair? Okay, right, Gary or Lindsay, would you like to respond to Councillor Buckley?
Okay. So in terms of the motorcycle lane questions, yeah, the changes need to be advertised, and they will clearly be signed. If you recall, when we discussed this in some detail last year, there has been a concern that allowing motorcycles into bus lanes might result in a road safety issue. There have been trials in other parts of the country where our feelings were that they were inconclusive as to whether they worked positively or not. And so there has been a concern about possible road safety impacts. But following consideration last year, the recommendation was, and it was agreed, that we would have this trial, and that's what we're seeking to do. And it will be, and one of the concerns that Councillor Buckley has raised is very much there, and we will need to mitigate that by making sure it's clearly signed on site and that it's effectively communicated. And equally in other places, at the moment, bus lanes and the vehicles that are allowed in and not are clearly shown and signed in accordance with the national rules and regs we have to follow. So someone who has, I have to say, passed their driving test and knows the highway code will be able to determine whether they're allowed into specific corridors or not. So, but these are the issues that we have to face and will be dealt with over the next few weeks and months. So hopefully that sort of quickly goes back over some of the background and how we seek to mitigate it over the next few weeks.
Okay, Neil, do you want to come back on that?
No, that's fine.
Okay, I'm still having one or two connection problems. I'm hoping that people can still hear me. The next indicator was 3.9 number of children and young people killed and seriously injured, but I assume that our discussion on the previous item has subsumed that. 3.10 is satisfaction with a range of transport services. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay. 3.11, number of passengers boarding buses in the Leeds district. Does anyone have any questions on that? I'm afraid I'm flying blind at the moment because I can only see myself. I can't see anyone else at the moment. So if you can't hear me, if someone could just put on the chat or text me, Becky, if you can't hear me. Right, I've got question from Neil Buckley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just a really quick point about that specific item you just mentioned about passenger numbers. Obviously, the numbers we heard are historic and are before the pandemic, and it's not just with a pinch of salt, it's just complete history now. And so just to make the point that we've all made before, that the figures for next year and the year after are going to be a whole new world, and we're just going to have to see what happens in all sorts of ways to passenger numbers.
Okay, thanks for that, Neil. I'll take that as a comment rather than as a question. So that takes us to 3.12 on page 195, increasing city centre travel by sustainable transport. I haven't got anybody indicating they want to speak on that. 3.13, number of residential and commercial properties moved to a lower level of flood risk. Does anybody want to ask a question or comment on that? Moving over the page to 3.14, city region and devolution. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? Okay, so if you can still see me and hear me, I can't see any movement or anybody indicating. We'll thank everyone who's attended for this agenda item and move on to agenda item 10. Before we do, could you just give me a short time to try and improve my connection? So if we could, you just give me 30 seconds or a minute or so to see whether that can be done. You're not streaming. Sir? Okay, I'm back. It seems to have improved ever so slightly. Right, that takes us on to agenda item 10, the referral to the Scrutiny Board by Councillor Firth. In our pre-meeting, we decided that the way we would handle this, and I will allow the participants to introduce themselves, is that we would give Councillor Firth 5 minutes to speak. Obviously, he's also put his views in writing via the letter to Councillor Mary Harland, that we will then have the 2 executive board members, then Mark Mills, who will introduce the officer report that we've got. Then we'll throw the matter out to questions to any of those 4 people from the board, and then we'll give Councillor Firth a short time possibly just a minute, Sam, to come back. So if we could start by asking Councillors Cooper and Lewis to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper, and attending this scrutiny board this morning as ward member for Temple Newsham.
Thank you, Debbie. James.
Good morning, Councillor James Lewis, one of the deputy leaders and executive board member for resources, which covers asset management.
Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Sam Firth, Harewood Ward, who's made the scrutiny request.
Martin, we've already had an introduction from, and Mark Mills.
Mark Mills, Head of Asset Management, overseeing land and property, covers the disposals as well as strategic planning of our estate.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Right, Sam, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to bring this to the board today. Obviously, the reason for my letter, as you may have read already, is in relation to the accelerated capital receipts and estate rationalisation programme that the administration have taken forward, given the understandable financial pressures that they're under at this moment in time. The reason I wanted to raise this matter with the board is in particular relevance to the disposal of a number of historic buildings, but particularly East Lodge on the Temple Newsham estate, which I know that many of us will know very well when throughout our times living in Leeds, me born and bred in Leeds, we will have gone through the North Gate along Colton Road and Elm Tree Walk and passed through East Lodge and West Lodge that form the two gatehouses that survive on the Temple Newsham estate. And I have a serious concern that unfortunately the correct amount of consultation and information has been provided to allow for this decision to be properly scrutinised, and therefore I would like the scrutiny board to take up an investigation to see really the implications of that decision, especially in relation to East Lodge, and also more generally in terms of how that should reflect on the programme itself and future programmes that come forward that may result, as we never know what's going to come forward given the current circumstances, understandably. I want to, first of all, just give a bit of background about East Lodge, very briefly. Grade 2 listed, built in 1742. There is two gatehouses on Elm Tree Walk, the East and the West Lodge. They are effectively symmetrical, and up until the transfer over to the council in 1922, when it was bought from Lord Halifax, the retained as effectively the houses used for staff that were working on the estate. And since then it became a social housing property by around about the 1960s, and effectively then as a result has had a number of different tenants. And unfortunately the East Lodge in particular became empty in about 2017-2018. Since then, there was a discussion brought forward by then the Executive Member for Communities, Councillor Cooper, who raised the idea and approved the idea of selling off the property in the late 2018. And unfortunately, that decision itself was based on lack of consultation. The fact was there was no consultation with the Friends of Temple Newsham Park, a group that in itself was set up to be that liaison between the council and the community to ensure that they could actually have an active part in not only fundraising for the estate, but maintaining it. Because ultimately when it was sold, if you look back into the conveyancing reports, it was sold as clause 3.2 states in the original document signed with Lord Halifax that the present character of the said manor house as a place of national and historic interest shall be preserved. And not only that, that it should be for a public park, and that the East and the West Lodge at the North Gate were included within that. And not only are they symmetrical, but we feel that there is potentially the vulnerability that if it were to be sold, that there is the problem of it actually potentially meaning that they no longer have that historic nature that they provide and have done for so many years, because of the fact that obviously there would be potential covenants that the council has talked about putting in place, but whether they actually would be effective enough is another question. So as a result, I would like the scrutiny board to look into the consultation, to look into whether it's appropriate in this case of what has happened, especially when it comes to this. I also feel it's short-sighted. I know I've been quoted in the press as calling it an excuse. The pandemic is being used as a reason to sell this property. Let's not forget this has been going on since 2018, and as I have outlined in my request, a timeline of those meetings based on the minutes of the liaison meetings between the Friends of Temple Newsham and the council, agreed with council officers, those notes, that actually there was discussions taking place, but those discussions were on the basis that the property would be retained. No discussion has actually taken place until the 1st of December 2020, where actually the council in an active way was actively consulting with the Friends of Temple Newsham Park and effectively the community on the sale, and that the sale was going to go ahead. And I hope that the evidence that I've provided is a basis for that as well. So I hope that that provides a very brief overview of where I feel that this scrutiny request could go. And I really would like to see that, you know, we make sure that we don't look short term. Yes, we understand that we need to realise the money that needs to be available given the financial situation. But this is a historic part of the estate. Temple Newsham, as it was stated in the original conveyancing report.
Okay, Sam, that's your 5 minutes. That's
Thank you
your
very much.
5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, Deborah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'm really pleased to be at Scrutiny Board so that I can actually add some balance to the documentation that you've all received regarding this scrutiny referral. I've got to say, this has been an ongoing situation in Temple Newsham with our ward councillors and with our community. I've got to say, Sam, that I think that you're wrong. And also to tell you that as ward members, we do talk and engage with our communities a lot. And we did so over the issue about East Lodge and the disposal of East Lodge. Now, whether that was either from the Housing and Communities that then released it to asset management, or whether that's actually asset management that are looking at the sale of it now. I think at the time that I know that I had many conversations with the Friends of Temple Newsham, particularly the chair, who unfortunately, I have to tell you, has sadly passed away in the meantime. The Friends groups are really committed, as Sam said, he's right on that, they're really committed to Temple Newsham. And as such, we do talk to them and engage with them an awful lot as ward members, as you would expect us to do so. They have sadly lost 2 chairs in the recent 3 years, I've got to say. And both of who we used to have regular conversations with and talk to about all the issues that were raised around Temple Newsham, or indeed inform them about issues or thoughts or anything that we were thinking about in regard to Temple Newsham. The now chair that's taken over from that is no different. So we're continuing to talk with the present chair around the issues to do with Temple Newsham, and in particular East Lodge, I've got to say. And I've already had one meeting with them around this, and actually my next meeting with them is tomorrow, so that we can discuss this matter further from what they raised with us at the last meeting, and confirm some of the things that they wanted to know about. So that engagement and that consultation has been ongoing since 2018, I have to say, with the Friends. We don't only meet them in their liaison meetings with the council, I've got to say, we meet them socially when we're out. When we're round about our ward, we see them, we chat to them. In fact, I remember first discussing this with Liz Hayes at a funeral at St Mary's Church. So that's when it was first raised, and that was back before the decision was made in 2018. Now, I know she can't be here to say, but I'm here to say and rebut what you said about some of my comments in Executive Board. And I just want to stand by all those comments that I've made. We do talk to the Friends. We have talked to all the previous chairs. We continue to do so. And that's the reason why it didn't go further forward in 2018 for members of the Scrutiny Board and yourself, Chair, but particularly for Sam, was because of the comments that we received as councillors from a number of the Friends who were concerned about it. So we looked and tried to find alternatives, an alternative way of raising the money in and around the estate to see that it would be less impactful. And that's particularly why that didn't go ahead from 2018 until now. And quite rightly, we're in the situation we're in now, in a pandemic, where we have the biggest financial crisis that we have ever seen or witnessed, any of us, in peacetime. And that's why we're having to accelerate the receipt for capital receipt for this asset, I've got to say. Without us being in that position, we would not be making the decision to sell East Lodge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. James.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll follow on from Debbie's excellent explanation around the relationship with local groups. Just to say a few words, obviously I agree with everything Debbie said, so I'll just say a few words about the accelerated capital receipt programme. Again, it's worth putting this in the context. As a council, we've faced 10 years of cuts with £2 billion coming up to taken away from the council's budget. We have a legal requirement to balance a budget every year, and we have had extra pressures with the cost of COVID, which on top of the cost we set in our budget in February last year has cost the council nearly £190 million. Some of that has been offset by government grants and other income, but we're still facing costs from there. And we're also looking to the future, where the long-term impact of the pandemic has seen a reduction in our business rates and council tax income, alongside the long-term trend in our reduction in government grant to support services. So the financial position of the council is pretty grim. And in order to try and balance the budget and protect frontline services that everybody in the city relies on, we have looked at the accelerated capital receipt programme to do two things. First of all, to bring in extra resources from buildings that are currently void and buildings that will no longer needed for service delivery, and also to reduce the cost of running the council's estate, reduce the cost of asset management, so that we are able to move the council, allocate the council's scarce resources to frontline services. That's the background to the accelerated capital receipt programme. I'll also say at this point that reading back through opposition party budget amendments in recent years, capital receipts have formed a large part of many of those amendments, and obviously opposition parties don't actually list which buildings they would intend to sell. Maybe they've got a secret list, I don't know, but we do. They will be obviously based on the council's existing estate and the existing list of void properties. So it's perfectly possible this East Lodge could be one of those buildings. We don't know on that, but that's the context of it. I think there's a cross-party consensus on minimising the cost of asset management and making an income from the council from capital receipts. That's a conclusion I would draw from that. In terms of East Lodge, again, Debbie gave an excellent history of some of the negotiations there, and obviously work has been done to try and bring in external funding to try and renovate this building, and unfortunately that hasn't been successful at this point. So the proposal is to sell, and again I just underline this point, to sell a leasehold to the building, not a freehold, as your council question said, Councillor Firth, and I'm sure because you're a very fair-minded person, you'll be take the opportunity to correct the inaccuracy in the question you put down at the last council meeting. The intention is to sell a long leasehold, which will give council still ownership of the building and the ability through that to make sure that all the historic features that we all want to preserve are maintained through the life of the leasehold. But what it does do is it brings in a capital receipt for the council, and the leaseholder who takes it on will renovate the buildings within the parameters of its historic location, as we require, with their own money. So there's no requirement on scarce public money to renovate that building. So that is that's my perspective on how we've got to this position, and actually what really important safeguards we've put on the future of East Lodge. I mean, in effect, the end of this process will see it going from a building that was leased out previously. It'll have had a period where it had no tenant, and then it will continue to be leased out in the future. I think it's a continuation of the previous position, and with suitable controls on it, and like I say, an ability to keep a really historic building that many of us know very well, without having to invest public money into it. I think it's a win all round, and certainly we will continue. And I know Debbie and Award colleagues will continue to keep the pressure on to make sure that all those safeguards are in place. I think it's a good outcome, for everybody. And I know those important discussions will continue as we come to the point of where it is marketed and then, like I say, the lease is sold. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Mark Mills.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to say a few words. I don't know whether Martin Farrington wants to say something in advance of that, just to set a bit of context, Martin, if that's okay, Chair.
Would it be helpful, Chair, if I just go through the sort of factual background?
Yes, providing Mark doesn't then duplicate that if and when he speaks.
I'll ask him not to. So yeah, the report that's been appended just aims to give the factual background behind the reports in terms of it outlines the history of them. I understand the West Lodge did have an extension in the early 20th century. As outlined, the lodges have been used and managed as part of the council's social housing portfolio since the mid-1960s. So in that respect, they've not formed any part of any wider function within the estate or the park. And as Councillor Lewis set out just now, they will have been leased out to tenants on long-term secure tenancies. The East Lodge or the West Lodge continues as part of the social housing portfolio, but the East Lodge became vacant in 2017, and it was taken out of that portfolio of social housing because of cost to bring it up to decency standards. The report does outline how Parks looked at it in the context of the Heritage Lottery bid. Two aspects on that. One is the actual Heritage Lottery proposal is not funded in the council's capital programme at the moment. That doesn't mean to say it couldn't be in the future, but at this point in time, there isn't a funded scheme. And secondly, whilst Parks may have had discussions about the property, Parks were not responsible for the property and it didn't come under their management, albeit being part of the wider estate. The report then highlights, in terms of the need to bring a future and sustainable use, that it was proposed to come forward into the capital receipts programme. Ward members were consulted on that when it came forward to Executive Board in January and supportive. The normal convention, Chair, on asset management officers consulting on capital receipts is to consult with ward members. It doesn't mean to say they can't consult more widely, but that would be directed by the ward members. It would be unusual and not something that I would recommend for individual officers in asset management to decide a broader consultation outside of engagement with the ward members. That report that went to Executive Board in January 2020 agreed that it went into the capital receipts programme for sale in 24-25. That report was available for call-in, but no call-in was requested. In light of the COVID pandemic and financial pressures that Councillor Lewis outlined, it was further brought forward to Executive Board in October 2020 to bring it forward advanced in the capital receipts programme, which was approved. The decision to sell the leasehold interest, as Councillor Lewis outlined. The decision again was available for call-in. Ward members have been consulted and were supportive, and there was no call-in exercised. As Councillor Cooper outlines, engagement continues with the Friends of Temple Newsham in terms of any concerns they have about the proposals and how they can be mitigated through how we manage and progress the sale. And alongside that, the property, as outlined, is listed and has protections through the listing as local planning authority. And then we can conclude the report that following a conservation approach, that the normal best practice is to try and use a heritage building for its original purpose, that these buildings were developed and brought forward as residential properties, and through the sale process that would be the intention to continue. So that's a brief summary of the factual background, which I hope is helpful, Council.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Do you have anything to add to that, Mark?
Not a great deal, Chair. The only thing that I would say is that we've dealt with this and the engagement with ward members in line with the approach that we have discussed with the Resources and Strategy Scrutiny Board in terms of our void management approach. So we've used a very standard approach to the engagement and progression around this particular property. And as Councillor Cooper says, continue to be involved with the Friends of Group in the discussions that are taking place now.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Now I'll open it up to questions from board members. Do any board members have questions? Councillor Wadsworth.
Sorry, Chair, I can't see my hand going up, so I wasn't sure it had gone up.
No, your hand did go up, and I have called you.
It's just a question really to, I don't know which officer can explain it in more detail. Councillor Lewis said that they were going to sell the building on a lease, which meant they retained the building. Now, that's not my understanding around a lease, that you buy the building and still the council still retains it, or the previous owner still retains it. My understanding is the building will be the purchaser's ownership, and the land will be the leasehold, but there is no prospect of us ever being able to take that back under that sort of a lease. We would just be getting some income possibly from the lease, I guess. Is that correct?
Well, what we do, Councillor Wadsworth, is we'd sell a leasehold interest in the property. So we would be the head lessee. We would sell that for a premium. So rather than taking a rental as an ongoing basis as a lease, we would take an upfront premium. As long as the party that bought that lease didn't fall foul of their obligations as a leaseholder, then that lease would remain for the period of the leasehold interest that was being sold. In the same way that the social housing tenants had security of tenure through their lease as long-term leasehold interest. So in that sense, that there's a long-term leasehold interest that we would be selling to a third party.
Can you just come back? Just with that. So we sell the lease to just for argument's sake, a developer who says he's going to do the property up and then rent it on, and he doesn't do that. He just sits on the property for whatever reason. He might have cash flow problems. He might think it's a long-term investment. He doesn't want to do up. We can then take that lease back if we don't feel that he has renovated the property to what is compliant with both the listing and our set out standards in the lease. We can then take that back from him, can we? Or the legal agreement stop us doing that?
Well, we would have rights to progress forfeit if the obligations under the lease weren't fulfilled. I don't know, Mark, you're closer to the detail on this, because in terms of what that lease will actually say. Do you want to add some detail?
I think there's a Councillor Wadsworth. There's a few clauses and terms that will be added to the lease, which really reflects the concerns that the Friends of Group have already expressed to us, which is around the use, the condition, and appearance of the property, particularly given given its profile and historic nature, and so there will be clauses that give us that protection, and therefore if the leaseholder does anything which contravenes those clauses, then yes, we will be able to look at taking proceedings against them, and clearly the appearance and the condition of the building are of utmost importance in that respect. But it's also worth remembering, and it's been referred to as part of the discussions here, that the building is listed and therefore has that added protection through the planning process as well, for any changes that are made.
Okay, Paul, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I don't want to hog the debate because I know others want to come in. It's just around, you know, should we have this building sold on and then a carbuncle we wanted to put on the back of it and that not be able to get through planning? Would we be able to take that building back, or are we left with a long protracted process with a carbuncle going on the back? I say that because I've got a heritage building in my ward where that is sort of going down that route. And some of the friends group don't want the carbuncle to go on the back, and we're going down a protracted planning process with that. And I just wonder what our clause is to take this building back, because we clearly have nothing to take the building back in my ward. Not that I want to, but ultimately it's around whether we could actually take it back into ownership if we felt it was inappropriate development.
Yeah, I mean, so, certainly we will be making sure that the clauses are robust enough to allow us to proceed down that route, and certainly legal colleagues are very heavily involved in this to ensure that we do afford the right protection before we start that the marketing process.
Okay, thank you, Neil Dawson.
A point of clarification on that as well, Councillor Trustwell. So under that scenario, Councillor Wadsworth, the councillor's planning authority would have controls through a planning application and listed building consent. The council would also have control through the lease as to whether, as the owner of the property, it wanted to consent to those alterations. So we would be managing our control of that through two separate mechanisms: one as the freehold owner of the property, and secondly as local planning authority, if that helps.
Okay, thank you, Neil Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the nub of the issue for me is the degree of consultation, and I think this is coming to the third question that Sam asked in his letter, getting the correct balance. And in fact, he started his presentation by talking about the correct amount of consultation. Did it occur in this case? And I think the officers have confirmed that there was the normal amount of consultation in this case, i.e. consulting with ward members. And I think it's fair to think that officers have got to rely on the effectiveness of their local councillors, that they're aware of groups and individuals that may have an opinion on a major issue in their ward. And I think, you know, we have 3 excellent councillors in Temple Newsham, and therefore, you know, I think there's good reliance on those councillors to be aware of who would be interested. And I think that's proved by what Councillor Cooper said about engaging with the Friends. So, I mean, as I said, I think the nub of the issue was the correct, the normal consultation. And I think officers have said there was the normal consultation. I think on the word correct amount of consultation, obviously it could go to the nth extreme and consult by sending letters to all residents or anybody that's interested in Temple Newsham in the city. And there'll be thousands of people who live in the city who have a great affection for Temple Newsham. Where do you stop? What is the correct level of consultation? And I think in this issue, as with all capital receipts, starting with ward members is the best thing to do, and I think that was done. So that's my obviously question back to Sam and comment on the issue, Chair.
Okay, well, I'll take that mainly as a comment, and Sam can maybe, if he wishes, pick it up when he's given the opportunity to sum up. I've got Neil Buckley next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think the first part of what I wanted to say has been partly addressed already, actually. But we've heard that this property is grade 2 listed, and I imagine had it been grade 1 listed, any sale would have been very, very difficult for obvious reasons. But I just wanted to ask the question, and maybe Sam could take this up when he has his brief response. Is that grade 2 protection going to be enough to protect the building as we want it? or is there a worry that it might not be sufficient? And also, the second part was, are we sure that this will be limited to domestic use? Is there a worry that it could eventually drift off into something else? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Martin or Mark, do you want to respond to that?
I mean, in terms of the lease will have a user clause, Councillor Buckley, and it will limit the use to residential dwellings. So I don't see any prospect of that risk coming forward in a way that we can't control through the lease. In terms of the Grade 2 listing, I mean, that does mean that the heritage aspects of the property have protection and status through that listing, and that any development proposals or alterations that impact on the setting of the listed building and the heritage aspects would be controlled through the conservation process.
Okay, thank you. I've got Katie and then Jonathan. Katie.
Yes, thank you. Mark, you said earlier that there will be clauses that protect the appearance and the condition of the building, and Martin, you've just added about the use. Will there somehow be some protection that says that once the sale has gone through, it then has to be occupied and not just kind of hung onto as an empty building? I know that was vaguely asked before, but I don't know whether it was answered.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dye. I think this is something that the Friends of Group have raised, and so therefore it is one of the things that we are working through with legal advice at this point in time. So there's no reason why we, as part of that user clause or use clause, that we can't extend it to that.
Okay, Katie, do you want to come back? Okay, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I actually do want to kind of expand on that, and because I also don't feel Councillor Wadsworth got an answer to the point that he was making earlier on, particularly around some sort of buyback clause. If the council can't afford the 50k to bring it up to standard now, if planning permission is consistently refused to whatever upgrades a developer wants to do to make it inhabitable, they're just going to sit on this and it's going to be left to ruin. Similarly, if we can't put a tenant in and haven't been able to put a tenant in since 2017, how can we enforce a developer or the next owner, as Councillor Dyer said, to put in a tenant as is if they can't get the permission to do the upgrades? That's my first question, which I'd appreciate an answer to. Second is that there does seem to be sort of concerns or disagreements around formal consultation. Kind of Sam's accusation in his letter on behalf of the Friends that they weren't formally consulted until October. Sort of soft or informal consultations don't usually count towards any sort of council decision making, in my experience, particularly in my ward on various other projects about other things. So has those sort of soft and informal consultations, if they took place, been considered in this circumstance?
Okay, thank you. Martin or Mark?
Perhaps if I start with the first point. I mean, in terms of Councillor Wadsworth's point, and then the point you followed up with, Councillor Taylor, I think in terms of the lease and what we do, all the matters of owner occupation, assignment, subletting can all be controlled through that lease. I mean, my own expectation would be that this would be bought by someone that would refurbish the property for their own habitation rather than subletting, and if there are concerns on that, then we can control that through the lease, because we will ultimately need to grant consent to any subletting or assignment. So I think that's how we would control that there. In terms of the second point, Mark, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So yeah, I think in terms of consultation, while as Councillor Cooper says, there's been lots of discussions that ward members have had with the Friends of Group, and there's also been a lot of engagement between the management of the Temple Newsome estate and the Friends of Group as well, and as well as you know, all the conversations that have taken place at Temple Newsome Forum and so on. I think what we have had is feedback from the ward members to those conversations, and certainly that has informed where we've got to and our views around leasehold as part of the ongoing discussions that we're having with the Friends of Group. So I think you know, as has been referred to already, it's very difficult to determine the extent of consultation. We've undertaken what we would normally do, and as I say, ward members have raised our awareness to the issues that have been outlined locally.
Okay, thank you. No one else is indicated.
Sorry,
so
yeah. Beg your pardon, if I may just quickly come back.
Yes, of course, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still not particularly clear, Martin, on what we're saying regarding the lease. Are we saying that if a private buyer purchases this and puts in an application to, you know, completely revamp absolutely everything, which I'm sure is probably needed in the property, wants to put in the modern kitchen, modern bathroom, underfloor heating, you know, if someone's making an investment in this type of property, they're likely to want all the mod cons to go with comfortable living, potentially a extension on the back or whatever it might be. And we at planning level say, no, you can't do that. It has to be sympathetic. And they say, well, we don't want to live like that. We want a different approach. We're saying, well, you have to live there anyway, as per sale, as per the lease, is what I think has been suggested. Is that credible? I don't see how that could be enforced in any way. And secondly, Mark has just said it's difficult to determine the extent of consultation. I mean, for me, that then suggests that potentially a further session is needed, where potentially we could invite representatives from the Friends Group, that they could give us their interpretation of what consultation has gone, so that we as a board can determine whether or not full consultations happened. And that, I think, is something that I'd be prepared to move after I've got these responses. Thanks.
Would you come back on that, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, there are a great many listed buildings in the city. The vast majority of them are not owned by the council, and in terms of people wishing to refurbish listed buildings and make changes, they're managed through the local planning authority. There are numerous examples where the council owns listed buildings and leases them out. Some of the most high-profile buildings in the city fall under that category. So the Corn Exchange is an example, and you know, the Corn Exchange has been sold on a number of occasions in recent years, and the expectations of the buyer, what they can do with that property through that lease, and the controls that we have on that Grade 1 listed building are all managed through that process. So in terms of this one, Councillor Taylor, I mean, I'm relatively relaxed about that, but the detailed questions you're asking me, I can't give you a definitive answer because I've not seen this lease, and it's not been, I don't think, completely drafted yet. But in terms of a buyer buying a listed building, they will need to understand that they can only work within the confines of its listing, and that's the case whether it's this building or any other listed building that's bought. And what we will do is put complementary controls in the lease to ensure that, in consultation with members, and we will have detailed discussions with Councillor Lewis as the portfolio holder on this, and we'll have detailed discussions with Councillor Cooper and her ward colleagues, to do that check and challenge on the nature of the risks, what needs to be managed, and we will, with legal, develop a lease that provides those appropriate controls that protect the council as landowner and are complementary to our position as local planning authority. That's quite a standard approach that we would undertake.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Mark, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would say is that as part of our disposal process, that the terms of that lease will be visible to any prospective purchaser. So they will be well aware before making any offers the terms that they have to abide by.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, coming back to the point that you want to move an approach, can we leave that until we reach that part of the meeting where we start deciding how we address that element?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair.
Could, in the absence of any other comments or questions, could I just ask, what is the current condition of this property? What is it costing to keep it secure and hopefully weatherproof? And I know this is a bit of an how long is a piece of string question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the feasibility in the foreseeable future of obtaining the resources internally and or externally of carrying out the necessary refurbishment and bringing this back into productive use?
So the cost that was estimated, there's been a few values given to this, and in many ways it's the passage of time that has led to those different values and for slightly different purposes. So they range between £50,000 and £70,000, and as Councillor Cooper indicated, originally Parks and Countryside were exploring ways as part of other works to the estate as how they could be funded, and as Martin said, there was a proposal at that time to explore the potential for a Heritage Lottery Fund application for the estate, of which this could have been included, but that would require an element of match funding from the council's capital programme. And that is not something that at this time is in the programme. And equally, I think in terms of the use of the property, it is a residential property, and I think that's something that we've probably well acknowledged during this discussion. And from a social housing perspective, I think the view originally was taken that the cost of investment to bring it up to decency standard and continue its use for as social housing was excessive compared to in the context of that overall housing revenue account budget and the investment that would be made elsewhere. So I think it's difficult to imagine or identify other uses within that the council may have for a residential property of this type, and something that has therefore guided us towards securing its long-term use for as a residential property, and doing so by the sale of the long leasehold.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Martin, did you want to come in on this same point, and then I'll come to Paul Wadsworth?
Just a point of detail that I think it might be helpful to understand, Councillor Trustwell, but as part of social housing portfolio, those houses would be subject to right to buy. And there are examples historically, going back numbers of years, of prominent council buildings that aren't necessarily part of the normal social housing portfolio that are subject to right to buy. So linking that back to your question about a sustainable use, well, a sustainable use within the council is either it goes back into the social housing portfolio and therefore that right to buy clock starts again, accepting that the West Lodge has been occupied for some time, or it becomes a service tenancy, and service tenancies are need very close management over the long term, because they can if they're not kept up to date over a number of years in terms of the direct relationship between the employee, service and their occupation of that property, it then defaults into being akin to a social house, and the right to buy issues arise. And there have been, again, as I said, instances where occupiers of service tenancies have sought to exercise right to buys over previous years. So I think that risk is probably worth understanding for members.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I'm going to bring Paul Wadsworth in, and then I'm going to close this particular section of the discussion and allow Sam a couple of minutes to sum up. So, Paul, go on.
I wasn't aware, Chair, that you were doing comments separate to questions, because my first two were questions. But this is just a comment. I mean, the more tighter you make the lease and the more clauses you put in, surely that devalues the property. From personal experience, you know, if there's anything in a lease that I don't like, I walk away straight away. So obviously that's going to have an impact on its value, which means that what we're getting into the council pot is reduced. And secondly, a comment around consultation. I do think we need to know more about the consultation. I'm not in any way doubting that Councillor Cooper has done the consultation with the Friends group, but has she been to a formal meeting of the Friends group, and do we have a minute to just prove that? It's not me wanting to say she hasn't done it. I'm sure she has done it, but in her own explanation, she said it was done at a funeral. I don't expect us to take minutes at funerals, etc. But if she's been to the Friends group and we have a minute that has happened, then that clears up the consultation thing completely. If there's a minute, and I just wondered, Chair, if we could get that information.
Okay, that sounds like a question to you, Debbie.
Can I just say, Chair, I think that I've listened really intently to some of the questions in the debate, and I think that for me, this is more about, you know, political shenanigans than it is about saving the property in Temple Newsham. As I've said, myself and my ward colleagues are continuing to work with our community and with the friends of groups and other organisations within Temple Newsham. And I'm sorry to say that I think the opposition in terms of Councillor Firth and the way he's conducted himself in Temple Newsham recently just shows what his priority is. And it's certainly not about the benefit of this community. It's about him getting his political propaganda out there, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Right, I'm going to end the question session, and as promised, in a very generous way, let Councillor Firth have a couple of minutes to sum up. So, Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for all the questions and the time again.
And Sam, could I say, if you do raise anything in this summing up that relates to any of the other members here, then I'll feel obliged to let them come back. So if you could steer clear of that, I think, you know, you'd be doing us all a big favour.
Absolutely, Chair, but don't get me wrong, I do want to make sure that we certainly take this forward, because let's not forget that over 1,250 people have signed a petition against this, set up by the Friends of Temple Newsham. Over 50 to 60 people wrote to Councillor Blake before the Executive Board to say, can we delay the decision to have a proper consultation? Because ultimately this was brought forward by Councillor Lamb on the 21st of October at the request of the Friends of Temple Newsham, because they believed that they hadn't been properly consulted. And I am disappointed that there is such an emphasis on informal consultation, when in fact, I'm sure you would expect that we would do it absolutely properly, fair and transparently. And unfortunately, I also feel that there is also in the report some misleading information provided, in terms of the report saying that the meeting in February 2019 talked about the fact that there was going to be the sale of the property. That was an informal meeting, another informal meeting, if you read the timeline, that's been provided to me by the meeting minutes of the Friends of Temple Newsham. So I feel that we need to get the Friends of Temple Newsham in to give their perspective on this, because they have an official link with the council, and they are the ones that raised this request in the first place. And to just one little point to come back on in relation to what Councillor Lewis mentioned about a question that I raised about the fact of selling it as a freehold. That is because in the last meeting, I understand from our discussions with the Friends that it was raised that the council was considering, if not having decided, to sell it as a freehold. So I would appreciate if we can take that further in an inquiry, find out what the situation is, and actually get to the bottom of this. And when it comes to making a political debate about it, my question is actually about whether we've done it properly on this building. The public support that, as has been shown by the support that has come out. And I think that ultimately, if this council wants to hold up a transparent process, then a scrutiny inquiry is one way to continue that. And it's a shame that other things have been said when, unfortunately, in the past, other members that have spoken have accused others of playing political football, including chairs of the Friends of Temple Newsham. So I think getting the Friends of Temple Newsham in to discuss this with everybody would certainly be a very helpful way to understand if this decision and this process has been done properly, because unfortunately, they don't feel they have been consulted properly until the 1st of December this year, when it was first proposed back in October 2018. That's two.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Right. So this takes us on to the part of the meeting where we have to decide. And I just draw members' attention to the recommendations on page 205. And basically, the scrutiny board is asked to determine what, if any, further scrutiny activity is required in relation to the matter referred. Now, obviously, some of the comments that have been made have touched upon that, but I just want to hear the case for or against. I obviously have a view as chair, but I won't lead members by articulating it at this stage. So I think Jonathan indicated during the question session that you wanted to put forward a proposal.
Thank you,
Jonathan.
Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I think that there is cause for us to have a more detailed look at this with further contributors coming along. I think what we should be looking at is the future of the building itself in terms of a more detailed look to allow officers to come back with a more detailed lease, what they're proposing for future ownership would look like. This is a sensitive area. The property lies within the Temple Newsham estate, and that'll have ward and city-wide interest as to the planning future of it. I think we also need to consider further contributions on that, and has also been said a number of times now, it has been difficult to determine the extent of the consultation that has taken place so far, and I think further contributions from the Friends group, who are, I think, the source of some of these allegations, would be beneficial for us to understand how far this has gone. I think on a personal note, I will say this isn't potentially just about this building. This is about the future of heritage buildings across the city in all of our wards, which is the interest many of us have, and the outcome of this could very well set a precedent across the entire city. And to be accused of anything other than what we're here to discuss today is a little bit offensive, and I'd hope Councillor Cooper would reconsider her comments, because it does seem any time a comment is made that isn't to her liking, everybody else is playing politics, yet we can have streams and streams of anti-government, anti-Tory, anti-whatever rhetoric that comes out, and the rest of us just have to eat it. So they're my basis on moving that we proceed, Chair, with invitations to other relevant parties, both within the council and externally. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Neil Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd probably like to disagree with my colleagues. I mean, I think we've had a sufficient wide debate, and I'm satisfied that in the disposal of this capital receipt, we've had the normal level of consultations that would be expected for any property anywhere in the city. So I propose that we don't have any further action to take as a scrutiny board. That this has been dealt with in the normal manner of a disposal.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Does anyone else have any comments to make? Okay. Paul Wadsworth.
Sorry, Chair, I can't get the hand to go. Oh, it's gone up now. Look, it's different. Whenever you want it to go up, it won't go up the hand. I was just wanted to second Councillor Taylor's proposals, really. I think the 2 points he raises are worth exploring further. I don't know whether you were looking for a seconder or not, Councillor Truss.
No, I wasn't, but thank you for sort of crossing that T. In the absence of any further contributions, I'll share my views on this, although we could have gone straight to the vote. The issue of consultation is a moot one, isn't it? We all feel we've been consulted if we get our way, and we don't feel we've been consulted if we don't. I think it would be very, very difficult for scrutiny boards, ours or others, to start getting into the minutiae of what constitutes consultation, because we wouldn't just be talking about consultation regarding the disposal of a particular asset, whether it's this one or any one of a number of others. And I think that if members collectively or individually want to raise the issue of consultation, I think that's a perfectly legitimate discussion to have across the council, and I would look forward to it being initiated on that basis rather than trying to pigeonhole it into the particular activities of one section of council and one scrutiny board. I mean, one of the difficulties with taking this referral was which scrutiny board should it come to? Because of course, culture is under one scrutiny board. The approach of accelerated disposal comes under another scrutiny board. And I think we finished up with it because it happens to be in the hands of asset management. So I think this is just such a broad issue. It's not to minimize the importance of it, it's really to give it its importance. And I think it needs to be taken up elsewhere. I think we have had, and I think Councillor Dawson made this point, a very, very useful and helpful and interesting discussion, which has almost verged on being a mini inquiry in its own right anyway. My own view is that the practice of consulting ward members is one that we all either implicitly or explicitly subscribe to. We've all done it, we've all been involved, and I don't recall anyone in previously having questioned that as an approach. I think consulting ward members is a good way forward. And I think we also need to bear in mind that if we genuinely want decisions to be influenced locally, then the last thing we should be doing is issuing central diktats about what constitutes proper consultation and trying to dictate how ward members operate, not just in respect of this particular issue, but right across the piece when we consulted, because ultimately, as ward members, we are accountable to our electors. And I think that that is an important element of the whole process of the role of members. My third point, and this was touched upon by, I think, Martin and Mark, is that we would be putting an incredibly onerous burden on officers if every time we disposed of an asset, they had to identify who the stakeholders or interested parties were with a particular issue. In this instance, it's probably fairly straightforward, although maybe it's not. But I suspect it would be really, really difficult to set a precedent in terms of doing that. And my final point is that I cannot understand, if this was an issue that exercised some members to such a huge degree, why they didn't take the opportunity on, I think, at least 2 occasions to exercise their right to subject it to a call-in, which would have automatically required a scrutiny board to carry out an inquiry as such, or a call-in inquiry. So I don't quite understand why that hasn't happened. Having said all that, as chair, I'm now going to ask members to vote on this particular issue. And I'm not sure, Becky, and I'll look to your guidance as to how we do that. I can go through the members and ask them yay or nay whether they want to have a further inquiry, or if there is any other process that we need to go through.
It's a case of a majority vote, Chair. So however you want to do that. I know in previous meetings we've essentially done a roll call of the members, and they've given a yes or no as to whether they want to take that forward.
Okay, thanks. I sought that advice because in my 4 or 5 years of chairing this, I don't think we've ever had a vote that hasn't been unanimous, but clearly I suspect this one isn't going to be. So I think the proposal before us is yay or nay. Do we have a further inquiry or not? If you want to have a further inquiry, the answer is yes. If not, the answer is no. So I'm going to go through the board membership alphabetically, starting with Councillor Buckley.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Cunningham.
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Neil Dawson.
No, Chair.
Councillor Katie Dye.
No from me.
Councillor Jacob Goddard.
No from me, Chair.
Councillor Camilla McSood.
No, Chair.
Councillor Shazad.
No from me, Chair.
Councillor Taylor.
I vote yes, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Wadsworth.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, so I make that 6-3 without me as chair having to vote, but that would make it 7-3. So the decision of the board is that we don't conduct any further inquiry into this matter. But having said that, I think it has nevertheless been a very helpful, useful and informative discussion, and I thank everyone for their participation. Okay, that takes us on to the final item of the agenda, and that's the work schedule. I don't know if anyone's got any questions to raise on this. We normally just note it and move on. Okay. Right, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for your contribution. Thank you for our external attendees and officers, and all being well, I'll see you at the next meeting on the 17th of February, if not before. Stay safe, everybody.